Welcome to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
We're back with another brand new episode of the Leo Training Podcast. And this week's guest is Mark Allen. Mark Allen is arguably the most successful triathlete in the history of the sport. In 2012, he was voted the greatest endurance athlete of all time in a worldwide poll conducted by ESPN. One of the most interesting aspects of Mark's 15-year career as a world-class triathlete is that Mark never had a coach. In this exclusive interview, I sit down with Mark and we discuss what it was like training in a time period where technology was not as prevalent as it is today, how he did that and found success, and we also spend a huge chunk of time in this interview discussing the mental component to training and racing. Mark recaps some of his greatest races and what he was physically and emotionally and mentally going through during those experiences. This is an absolute can't-miss episode. Mark provides some great practical examples that you can integrate into your training and practice to help you become a better athlete. So be sure to have your pen and paper ready. Without further ado, we'll roll to episode 46, Taming the Mind with Mark Allen. I'm very excited and honored to welcome six-time Ironman World Champion Mark Allen to the Leo Training Podcast. Mark, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Me too. We've got an absolutely fantastic episode in store for the audience. We're going to cover everything from the physical side of training and spend a good chunk of time talking about the mental side of the sport as well. So before we launch into that, I would love for you to talk about your background as a collegiate athlete and how you transitioned into triathlon as your sport.
Yeah, sure. As a kid in 1968, I was watching the Mexico City Olympics. I was 10 years old, and it was the first real big sporting event I'd ever seen that was outside of basketball or baseball or football. And I was just mesmerized by the swimmers, especially the distance events, the 800 for the women and 1500 for the men. I just couldn't figure out how they could go that far without stopping, anyway, it just captured my imagination. And about a month after that, the local swim club where I was growing up in Palo Alto was having tryouts for their swim team. And my mom said, why don't you go just see if you can do it? And I thought, I can barely make one lap. You got to be kidding me. Anyway, I went and I started going back and forth and realized that, wow, maybe I can do more than one lap at a time without stopping. And that I was just 10 years old then, and I ended up swimming as an age group swimmer competitively all the way through college when I was graduated at 22. So I was a swimmer for 12 years. I was pretty outstandingly mediocre. I was never, I never made it to Olympic trials or set any records or anything like that. But I guess I built that internal engine through all of those years of going back and forth in the pool. Part of the reason I think I didn't do well is I wasn't training right back in the 70s and 80s. Every workout was hard. The concept of building an aerobic base was sort of not even in the vocabulary. So I think I was probably tired most of the time. And secondly, I'm just not genetically put together to be a great swimmer. If you look at, the guys that are on the finals in the Olympics, most of them are way over 6 feet. They have this incredible shoulder flexibility. Their knees bend backwards. They've got these giant paddles for feet, so anyway, when I graduated college, I thought, okay, that's the end of my life athletically, because at the time there was no afterlife for anybody, especially a swimmer. And about a year after that, I was entered in a 10K with my girlfriend at the time, and I didn't really run, but I did it anyway. and I was being beaten by these guys that were like, twice my age. And I thought, the light bulb started to just go on, like, maybe just because I'm 22 and I'm done with college swimming, that doesn't mean that's the end of what I can do physically. And then a year after that, when I was 24, I saw the Ironman on television for the first time. And it was February 1982, and I had never heard of a triathlon or the Ironman. I didn't know what it was. I turned it on. It was Wide World of Sports, and Jim McKay was just recounting this incredible day that was unfolding. And I was just mesmerized. Like, he said the distances, and I thought, man, I wonder how many days it takes for them to complete that stupid thing. And then, of course, he said, they start at 7 a.m. The last person has to finish 17 hours later by midnight to be an official Ironman finisher. I was just shaking my head, like, how can they do that? But then as I'm watching the show, these seemingly ordinary people were crossing that extraordinary finish line. And it was like a calling. Like, about a week later, I go, I have to go there and just see if I can be one of those finishers. I mean, I'd never really biked. I'd never really run. I had the swimming down. That was easy. But so, a little over 6 or 7 months later, I was on the start line of the Ironman, 1982. And at the time, there's no way I would have ever imagined it would have turned into a 15-year career. So that's the beginning.
Yeah, that is the beginning. That's incredible. So that's a great segue into one of the first points we had down here. So I think this is super important because it's 2016. We're talking about in a time period where we're so tech reliant. So I think it's hard for younger members of the audience to imagine a time where there's not a smartphone in their hand. So before we get to kind of racing, the Ironmans in the 1980s and stuff, and the into your career, could you just kind of set the environment? Like, what was it like training during that time period for a competition, an event of that magnitude and distance with, technology that's not really readily available as it is today?
Yeah, it was a very different focus in the way that you trained, in the way that I trained back then, and in the way that I sort of figured out how easy or hard to go in every workout. A lot of it was trial and error. We didn't have coaches like we have nowadays. There was no history of how to combine swimming, cycling, and running together into this one sport called triathlon. So those of us who were kind of at the forefront, we were just experimenting. We were seeing, okay, how many miles can you go in a week and still get benefit? How much running can you do? How much hard running can you do? How much easy running do you need to do? Just throwing a lot of different recipes out there and seeing what worked. And a lot of it was more intuitive than it was measurable. It's an interesting question because nowadays you can measure just about every aspect of what's going on, not only during your training, but then at night when you're sleeping and you wake up in the morning and, you look at your device and you can say, okay, my blood saturation is not right. And so I should go easier today than I had planned, all that kind of stuff. We had to develop that ability intuitively. And through that, I think we also were not defined or limited by a number. Like, let's say you have a goal. Okay, I want to push X number of watts on my bike. And so you get in a workout and you do that and you're able to achieve it at the particular heart rate that you want. And you're satisfied. You go, wow, okay, now I've got it. We never knew quite if we had it or not. So we continually
push the envelope.
Yeah, kept going a little bit further. And, how hard is hard? Well, I went hard, but was it as hard as I could have gone? And so you find ways to have an effort that is maybe harder, even though you're not measuring it. But inside, you're knowing yes or no it was. And out of that, I think when the races came, we were able to go beyond the numbers. And we were able to we had some stuff. Obviously, you had a stopwatch. You could measure your hundreds in the pool or whatever it was. But even that was sort of intuitive in the sense that, you're always trying to refine your stroke. On the bike, you could figure out how many miles you went. We had heart rate monitors, but that was it. And so there was a certain amount of data, but it was not an overabundance of data. And I think you can use all of the stuff we have now, but at the same time, if it distracts you from, if you have to look at your watch in the morning to figure out if you're happy or good or feeling good or not, you've lost a human capacity to understand yourself. And it's that self-understanding that will carry you into those realms that seem undefinable or seem impossible when you're in a race.
No, absolutely. I'm so glad you said that. So do you think that kind of touches on, a lot of times coaches or authors talk about, the art and the science of any sport, and some of the things you mentioned there, having that inner awareness, that intuitiveness, that's definitely kind of more on the art end of the spectrum, right? And building that kind of self-awareness of knowing how to push yourself and knowing when to step back and throttle up and down, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. There's so much that affects performance. Like, how do you measure commitment? How do you measure the ability to stay quiet when it gets chaotic? How do you measure drive and desire? How do you measure love and passion for what you're doing? And these are all real things. I mean, anybody who has a child or a close family member, they know that love is a real thing, but you can't look at your watch and say, okay, well, how much do I love the person? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's sort of like that in athletic performance. There's so much of it that can't be quantified, that also affects how you perform. And even the stuff that's quantifiable, that is sometimes the numbers don't match up with reality. So let me give you an example. Years ago, I was at a coaching conference in Finland, and one of the presenters was Tim Noakes, who wrote The Lore of Running. I mean, this guy, he knows more about endurance than probably anybody on the planet. And he gave this amazing presentation about how they had done research on our cells' ability to get fuel in through the cell membrane into the cell to be able to generate the force for exercise. And he found that every single person on the planet has the same upper limit in terms of the speed with which you can get energy into the cells. So in other words, there is an upper limit to how fast you can go over time, because if the cells run out of gas, you can't keep going, right? And so he said, we have mathematically proven that because of this upper limit that is the same for every single human being on the planet, it is absolutely impossible to get energy into your cells quick enough to run a 240 marathon at the Ironman. He said, however, and he points at me and he goes, there's a guy in the room who has done that. And so here's, it was just so amazing, because here's a guy who knows more about the numbers of endurance than anybody, but he's saying the numbers don't give us the full picture of what is possible.
Wow. That's incredible. Do you have like a link to that? That would be great to include in the show notes.
No, that was before the time of technology, so it wasn't recorded.
Oh, darn. Okay. Awesome.
It was at a conference in Finland in the middle of the winter, and it was light for maybe 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the day. At night, we would go in the sauna, and then there was a lake right next to the center, and there was a hole in the lake where it was completely frozen over, but this hole where they were bubbling air through it to keep a hole open. So you go in the sauna, get hot, and then you go and you jump in the lake, and then you go back in the sauna. It was amazing, but awesome. That's a whole other side.
Very cool. Okay, so you've kind of set the stage here for training in that time period, especially with not getting caught up in the numbers and not having the available technology, which from the way you talk about it, actually allows you to kind of develop a little bit differently as an athlete than nowadays. So you also mentioned a big transition was focusing on and building an aerobic base. So could you talk a little bit about that? Yeah,
aerobic, physiologically, any event over about 4 minutes engages in aerobic chemistry in your body. So if you can complete your Ironman in 4 minutes, you don't have to worry about developing that base. But if it's going to take you more than 4 minutes, obviously aerobic fat burning physiology is something that needs to be developed. Human beings are the best endurance animals on the planet. We can go farther, faster than any other animal, including horses. If you look at the world record for the Western States 100 for humans, and for horses, the humans record is a little bit faster. Wow. So we are built to just keep going and going and going and going. We're not built to go fast. I mean, we're relatively speaking, we're really slow. We're really slow. I mean, look at a squirrel run across your yard. That thing will outsprint you, right? So we have this huge aerobic physiology capacity in our bodies that if we develop it, then you're able to utilize stored fat for fuel. If all you do is fast stuff, you're turning off that fat burning physiology, you're engaging the carbohydrate burning, higher intensity fuel that's stored in your body. And that's more what you're going to rely on in the racing. Now, the catch is that if all you do is train hard, you've got this capacity to burn carbohydrate. That's great, but you run out of that really quickly. It won't last you through an Ironman. And you can't replace carbohydrate quick enough to sustain a high intensity output after you go about 2 hours on mostly carbohydrate burning. And that's why mile 20 of the marathon, people bonk, because they burned through their 2,000 calories of glycogen. All of a sudden, they can't get the calories in fast enough, the carbohydrate fast enough to sustain their speed. And when you go to that carbohydrate burning capacity physiology, you shut off the aerobic fat burning physiology. It all goes back to survival, fight or flight. Most of what our ancestors did was steady movement, just walking steadily, going up and down the hills, slow stuff. And every now and then there was danger. You had to run out of the way to get out, to safety. Fat burning is like diesel fuel. Carbohydrate burning is like high octane race fuel. So most of what we utilized in ancient times was the fat burning capacity. Fat burning is low stress on the body. Carbohydrate burning happens when we're under high stress. And so anyway, as that relates to endurance athletics, the better we get at burning fat for fuel by stimulating that physiology when we go out, by not going too hard all the time, you end up becoming a really efficient fat burning machine, which means that you can go really fast even at lower heart rates and staying in a low stress physiology within your body before you actually have to go over to that carbohydrate burning physiology, which is high stress, which shuts off fat burning. And again, once you start tapping into that glycogen, you've only got about 2 hours of it before you're toast. I got to the point, I did the bulk of my training aerobically, and it takes patience because if you've never developed that physiology, at first you're going to be going really slow before your heart rate is just going to skyrocket. But I was able to run about a 5:30 mile and still be aerobic, which means that, I'm running a 5:30 mile, my heart rate's still at around 150. And the other guys, their heart rate's at 160, 165. They're already well into the anaerobic zone. So at Ironman, for example, I was able to do the entire bike ride aerobically, which meant that when I got off the bike and was time to run,
you still had another gear. You still had
another gear. Yeah, and I still had a lot of the carbohydrates still stashed in there as glycogen. So it helped me out. It takes patience though, because it doesn't feel the same. If you go really hard, you feel like you did something. If you train aerobically, you kind of get home and go, oh, I feel all right. Did I really do much? But you did. That's the catch.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So next question. So I'm going to kind of set the stage for the audience a little bit. So looking back at the times throughout the 1980s, there was a tremendous improvement in the finishing times from the early 1980s until your first victory in 1989. And then up until recently, I believe in 2011, Craig Alexander went 8:03. There hasn't been a drastic improvement in the total finishing time. So my question is, are we potentially approaching the limits or the capacity of the human body to go much faster in this type of event?
I think obviously we're somewhere near the top capacity, because the first time I went under 8:10 in Kona was in 1989. I went 8:09 and change, and then I went 8:09 a little bit faster again. I went 8:09.14, then I went 8:09.08, and then eventually I went 8:07 and change. So in 6 wins, I was able to go under 8:10 3 times, but they were all within about a minute and a half of each other. Since then, Luke Van Leerd won. He went 8:04 high. Craig Alexander went 8:03 high, which is roughly 3.5 minutes difference between his time, which is the current record, and my best time. 3.5 minutes over an Ironman is, I don't know, not even 1% or something. And then this year, Jan Frodeno went 8:06 and change. So there have only been 3 guys who've gone under 8:10 since I quit, which means that obviously that 8:10 is kind of like we're bumping up against something. And I think what we're bumping up against in Hawaii anyway is your body's ability to manage the heat in that distance in the heat and the intensity of the island of Hawaii. It's different when you're racing in Europe and the temperature is 15, 20 degrees cooler. Your body's under less stress. And, your body can only handle so much stress per unit of time before it doesn't have a capacity to keep going harder, which is even more stress. In the ideal world, I always thought we could go around 7:45 in Kona. And I think Dave Scott also thought the same thing. It would probably take a very unusual day where there's no wind, completely overcast and cool, and just the right race dynamic. But so far, yeah, I think we're bumping up against a limiter, and I think that limiter is just purely the ability to get fuel into your cells to keep your pace up. And that ability diminishes when it gets hotter. The hotter it is, the more blood is going to your skin to try to dissipate heat, which means that less of it is available in your digestive system to take in the calories that you're trying to get to your working muscle. So if it's cooler, like in Europe, a lot of the Ironmans over there where the fastest times have been set for the distance, less blood is being shunted to your skin to dissipate heat because it's just cooler. So you have more of it in the digestive tract, which means that you can get your calories in quicker, which means you can sustain a higher output level on the bike, higher pace running. But I think in Kona, we're bumping up against something. Somebody will go under 8 hours for sure. At some point, and that'll be like this magic day, like, oh, somebody finally broke 8 hours. But it's going to be hard.
Yeah, no, I was curious because it seems like I was looking at the finishing times, and it like you said, that 8:10, it's like there's just big cluster right around that number for whatever reason. So it's just incredible, and I didn't even really think too about the environment of the race too, how much the impact of the heat. So that was great insight in terms of how that's an additional stressor on the body with blood flow and everything. Very cool. Okay. So kind of final question in regard to the physical training stuff before we shift into the cool stuff on the mental side. So one thing I've read several times in different pieces where you've been interviewed is you talked about as you were progressing into your career, it became increasingly more important for you to program in strength and conditioning work, just to maintain bone density and muscle mass and be able to kind of take the high mileage that the sport requires. So I was wondering if you could, speak to that a little bit and why you feel it's important for endurance athletes, and then also what type of strength work you yourself did and you have your athletes do.
Yeah, strength work is probably the least utilized tool for improving performance for endurance athletes out there, because most triathletes, they swim, bike, run, and strength training is the one thing that gets tossed every week if their time gets crunched and all that. I didn't do any until I was around 33 and a half. Part of the reason is I didn't know what to do. I wasn't trained in that aspect of fitness. And so, I lived a couple blocks from a chain called Gold's Gym. I don't know if you have them. Anyway,
Yeah.
And so I would, every now and then I would say, okay, I got to try to figure out how to do strength training. So I would get to the door of the Gold's Gym by my house, and I would open the door and I would look inside and look at these guys that were just giant sweating muscles. And I would just look at me, like little skinny runt, and I would just turn around and go, I can't do this. I was like totally intimidated. I mean, here I am, Ironman champion, intimidated to go in this gym. Finally, in 1992, I started, I was introduced to a woman, Diane Bukta, who actually lives in San Diego, where I was training a lot in the winters. And she was like an encyclopedia of strength training. And she just led me through an entire year of incorporating strength training, different phases throughout the different phases of my swim bike run. And a year and a half into it, in 1993, I had perhaps my best season ever, as far as just, I was completely on fire that year. I won the Nice Triathlon, the Avignon Duathlon, which was, in my opinion, the most physically demanding race that I ever did. And then in Hawaii, all in the same year, the only person to win all three of those. It was kind of like the triple crown of multi-sport time. And it was because I just had this added strength, and the reason I really said I got to do something is because I could see that prior to that, it didn't matter how much I would swim, bike, or run, I could feel that I didn't have the same snap. I didn't have the same recovery. I didn't have the same strength on the climbs. And I knew it was purely a strength issue. It wasn't a cardiovascular thing. So from that point on, I was sold, and you asked what I did. It was a very traditional kind of strength program in the gym. Like that was what was available back then. And then, since then, strength training has evolved to incorporate a lot more kind of functional movement, core work, balance work. And so, to give you an example of what I did compared to what I would have somebody do now, or what I actually do now myself, let's say you're doing a squat and you've got, this stable platform of both legs on the ground at the same time. So they're stabilizing the motion when you stand up straight. Once you've come down into that squat position, that's an important move for having power on the bike to be able to push down, right? Well, maybe you can squat 200 or 300 pounds when you're on both legs, but when you're on one leg and you only have one leg to push off of at a time, maybe you can only manage 50 pounds. So you've got 150 pounds worth of force that can't push anywhere because of the instability in your feet, your knees, your hips, wherever it is. If you do that same move, stepping up onto a block, one leg at a time, then all of a sudden you're developing strength, but in also the stability you need so that you're pushing straight up. And when you have that combination together, then you really can take your performance to a whole new level.
Fantastic. Yeah. So it sounds like you have transitioned to doing a lot more like unilateral work, single limb work.
Unilateral work. More recently, I've been developing some ideas that I've never read anything about, but I think they're going to be pretty cool. And what that is trying to develop moves that require as many muscles in your body to be contracting at the same time. So you're doing as little isolation as possible within the actual main part of what you're trying to strengthen within that move. And it just, this is only my feel, and a lot of what I did was based on feel. When I do that, it seems like those moves really cause your body to just pump out human growth hormone and testosterone and to really strengthen your entire body. Like if you do a curl, you can completely trash your biceps, but it doesn't feel like it does anything for your body, because the rest of it's just sitting there. If you engage as many muscles as you can at the same time, it seems like it just turns up the youth serum inside your body and says, let's electrify this whole thing here, this whole body that this guy's got, and make it stronger. you have to stay tuned. I don't have it all developed yet, but I'm working on it.
No, that's awesome. That's great. I mean, it sounds like some of the stuff that I've learned through Strong First, utilizing some total body isometrics and doing, higher level, body weight training moves, progressing from a push-up to a one-arm push-up to a one-arm, one-leg push-up. So you need to contract all that musculature. And even though you're going through a push-up, once you take a limb away or a leg as well, now you add that anti-rotational component to it too. So you have to try to keep your shoulders square to the floor as you're going down. So that requires a ton of core strength and stability that you're talking about there.
Yeah, and it's that cross fiber that is what really, I think, holds people's biomechanics together when they're doing the linear stuff like running a marathon. If you look at people as they start to fatigue in Ironman, a lot of them come across the line and they're leaning, one way or to the other side, or they're leaning over, and it's because I think your body has this mechanism where when you start to get a lot of breakdown, a lot of your brain just tries to shut everything off. And so if something's weak, it becomes really weak. Survival, like quads are breaking down. I got all this muscle damage. Brain says that's enough. So it starts to shut things down. And if you don't have all that cross fiber strengthening from stuff like you're just talking about, then all of a sudden your whole structure starts to collapse and you can't hold it up. You lose your efficiency, and then it's all downhill.
Yeah, that's not a good place to be.
No.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to shift gears completely away from the physical and the I wouldn't say the training side, because this is definitely a big component to the training side, but we're going to shift away from the kind of the programming aspect of the physical side and talk a big portion of this interview in regards to the mental component. And like I said, I've read some of your other interviews, watched videos and stuff, and there is such a huge appreciation. I've always sensed this, and it's resonated a lot with me. You have for the mental side of the sport, and how much that really plays a deciding factor in the end result. So I guess the kind of initial question is, you've mentioned early on too about learning to quiet your mind when there's sort of all this external noise. What does that mean, and why is that important?
Well, in a race, a lot of times the only thing you can change are the thoughts you're telling yourself. You can go a little bit faster, a little bit slower. You can eat a little more, a little less, drink something, take some sodium, whatever it is. But a lot of times that has very little effect on the big picture of what you're trying to do out there. And, when things start to go downhill, where do you go? Where does your mind go? And in day-to-day life, negative thoughts sort of take a while to sort of grab hold and manifest in terms of something changing in your life. Like you might go, I'm bored of training. I don't want to get out there. You got this attitude thing going, but you keep training, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks later you're injured or you get sick, and then you can't train. And then you go, oh, wait a minute. Actually, I do like to train. I want to get back out there. And it takes a while before it comes around and you're healthy again. You can train. Well, in a race, the thoughts that are going on inside of you have a very immediate effect on what's happening in your performance. It's like everything is super sensitive. And so, a lot of sports psychology says, well, have positive triggers that you can tell yourself that will give you affirmations that will help you make it through those moments where your mind's going down the wrong route. I have to tell you, if you could remember any of those things that you tried to program into your thoughts when you're in the race and you're in those moments, you'd be doing pretty good. But even if you can tell yourself those things, it's rare that you're even going to believe it. Like I feel smooth and strong and light. No, I feel like crap and my legs are killing me and I'm heavy and I feel like I weigh 1,000 pounds. You just don't believe that stuff when you're out there. It's just like when your friends are like, you look great. And you're going, no, I don't. I know what I look like right now. So just shut up, you know? So where do you go? You take a breath. You get your mind to be quiet. And when your mind is quiet, all of a sudden it's like your whole being begins to just expand out again instead of contracting because of negative thoughts or negative emotions, fear, doubt, anger, jealousy, whatever you're having. And when you're quiet, then it doesn't really matter how the day turns out, because all of a sudden when you're quiet, then suddenly you become engaged in making this moment right here be a success. And the success in this moment means that, yeah, I can take another step. I can get to the next aid station. Take another breath. You stay quiet even further. And then maybe an answer comes of how you can actually really turn the whole race around. You know, because a lot of times the solutions that will carry you to that ultimate dream have no connection to logic. There's no way you could logic your way into figuring out how you're going to turn the whole thing around. But if you can be quiet, that's when those answers come, or that perspective that keeps you fully engaged in the race, into giving what you have moment to moment, can manifest. And when you do that, then it's like things really do become limitless, and possibility is really off the charts. You know, and this isn't any thing that I just sort of came up with on my own. This came from years of studying with Brant Secunda, who is he teaches shamanism. He was trained in Mexico in the Huichol Indian tradition from central Mexico, and the Huichols they're a tribe in central Mexico. There's about 30,000 left, and they have a very deep, rich spiritual tradition. And part of spiritual for them is having their minds be quiet, you know, and that's one of the things that Brant has helped me to be able to learn how to do more and more, and then to be able to integrate that into what I was doing in my training, and then have it be my go-to place in the race. And anybody who's raced knows when you're not in that place. You know, it's like, this sucks. My legs are killing me. The person pulled away. I don't think I can make it. I should have gotten a day job instead of trying to be a triathlete. You know, all this stuff that goes on. That's not helping you out, you know. And so a lot of the retreats that I would go on with Brant, that's a huge part of it, was just over and over. You're just everything that we're doing is helping you practice to get your mind to be quiet. And when I'm speaking about quiet, I'm not talking about like you're just going to sleep like this. It's more like you're quiet in that all of a sudden you just really feel like you're connected to awareness, or you're connected to life, or things come to you that there's no way in a million years you could have thought of. And, you know, like the last year I was doing Ironman was in 1995, and I was 37 years old at the time. And I was trying to win my 6th Ironman. So going into the race, I had 2 levels of trying to do something that nobody had ever done before. I was trying to win as a 37-year-old, which at the time would make me the oldest champion. I was trying to win 6 wins and 6 starts, which Dave Scott won 6 titles, but he had one in there where he didn't win. So right from the get-go, I had 2 things that, you know, I couldn't Google. How do you win as a 37-year-old 6 Ironmans and 6 starts? You know, there was no answer. There was no Google back then either. But and then when I came off the bike, I was 13 and a half minutes behind Thomas L. Riegel, who was in the lead. He was 24 years old, 13 years younger than me. And nobody had ever closed that big of a gap to be the champion. So here now, as I'm starting into my final Ironman marathon of my career, I'm faced with 3 things that look totally impossible to do. And I had I'd gone to a lot of retreats that Brant had throughout that year. I met him in 1990 and had been studying with him for those 5 years already. But that year I did a little more intensive work on developing that internal place that is peaceful, that feels inherent happiness and joy just to be alive, that has nothing to do with needing to achieve a result to feel fulfilled. And that's a powerful place to race from. When you're on that start line And it ultimately doesn't matter whether you win or lose, because, life is good because you're even there. That's a powerful place to start from, because not that you're bulletproof, but it's like negative thoughts that come, they just come in and they wash out. They come in and they wash out, because you're not attached to that result. You're more there as almost even like you're doing it as a prayer, or a way to perfect yourself, or a way to explore another aspect of yourself as it relates to life and how you manage difficult things, which ultimately are the things that give you the greatest stories anyway, right? And so Brant had done a lot of work with me that year to help me to come back to be in the right place, to be able to hopefully win that race. And, when I started the marathon, I was just like cynical, is the most cynical I'd ever been. Like, I can't win this thing. I should have quit at 5. What am I doing here? Hellrigo's 13 and a half minutes ahead. There's no way I can make up that time. It's 30 seconds a mile. No, that's impossible, And, Brant had, one of the last things he said to me before I left to go to Kona, he said, nothing is impossible for the gods. Nothing, no mystery, no puzzle is too big for the great spirit, for the great mystery to solve. And, he had also really emphasized to just come back to that place where I was quiet over and over and over, even if I had to do it 1,000 times. And so as I started the marathon, I was cynical. I knew, and I could tell that I was going way down the wrong rabbit hole, right? And so I just, I was actually really ready to just give up, to quit. And then I thought, if I quit, there certainly is no chance of me catching Hellrigo. If I quit, there is no way that I'll honor all that help that Brant did to get me ready for this thing. I have family and friends who helped me. There's no way I could honor their help if I just quit. And so I just took that breath and had to take a few of them. But finally, I kind of got to that quiet place. And then the answer came, something just said, take it to the finish line. Just get to the finish. And, at first I'm like, get to the finish. I came here to win this thing. But then I realized that I was really hurting. And if somehow I could just pull myself together and get to that finish line, that would be a victory. That would be a victory. And it was like the whole race shifted. All of a sudden, my energy came back. I moved in. I passed the guy who was in 4th place a little bit up the road. I moved into 3rd, and then eventually into 2nd. And with 8 miles to go, I was told I was 4 minutes behind Hellrigo. So I was making up 30 seconds a mile, but I was still only on pace to catch him at the finish line, which is definitely not a good place to catch a guy who's 13 years younger than you when you're sprinting for the Ironman World Championship, right? And started to get cynical again, I can't do it. I don't know. Hellrigo, I can't even see the guys, I should, just all the stuff that is not going to help you become a world champion, right? That world champion mindset is that place of quiet. And then, so it's like, okay, all right, now there it is. There's the quiet. And then I remembered another thing Brant said. He said, race like your life depends on it. Give 100% of what you have to give. And it's like, yeah, it's so simple. That's all I can do. That's the most I can do. That's the best thing I can do. If I can do that, then no matter what happens, I'll be able to hold my head high. And he also said, call out to that island if you need help. It's alive and it will hear you. Because that's a lot of also what Brant teaches is just how to connect with nature, the spirit of nature, to empower your life, to empower yourself, to make you feel more alive. And we all know that, you go out for a walk outside, you were grumpy when you left, you come back, you're in a good mood. That's, human beings are inherently made to feel good when they're in nature. And so I looked around at the island and I said, hey, big island, just help me here. Just help me to find that little extra. And, cause I'm going to give everything I have. And the next mile I made up 40 seconds. And the one after that, I made up a little over 50. And the mile after that, I made up 1 minute and 15 seconds on the guy who'd been leading for over 6 hours. Finally, at mile 23, I came up behind him and okay, I was hoping this would be the final pass of my Ironman career. And I rested for a moment, and then I just went, and I didn't back off. And I was able to pull away and went on to win that sixth title that year. And, I had all the numbers in my logbook going into it that were important to have to feel like I had a chance. And without those, it wouldn't have mattered how much time I spent in nature. I wouldn't have won it. So you got to have that base. You've got to have that certain amount of those numbers. They have to be lined up fairly in line with whatever your goal is. Yeah. So you can't discount the numbers. However, then in the race to go beyond them, there's that whole other aspect. It's like your human aspect, your internal character, your internal environment, what thoughts are you telling yourself, your ability to connect and feel at home with the environment that you're racing in. The island of Hawaii is a very intense place to do a race. It's hot, it's humid, it's windy, the sun beats down on you, it scorches your skin. And the island itself has this very intense energy about it that you have to somehow, instead of trying to avoid, you have to be able to embrace it. And that was what the work that studying with Brant enabled me to do. I didn't start studying with him to win races. I started studying with him because I just felt like there's got to be more to life than getting good grades and winning races and making money and all this stuff. And I always felt so good in nature. And that's one of the foundations of Wheatrail tradition, is embracing the spirit of nature. And, we teach workshops together called Fit Soul, Fit Body. And we've done that since, I don't know, for almost 20 years now almost. And in those workshops, we explore those themes of sport and spirit and combining those worlds together. How can you exercise and eat in a way that will help you to be healthier and happier? How can you get rid of negative emotions and adopt positive qualities, positive thoughts? How can you quiet your mind? How can you connect with nature to empower your life so that it makes you a better triathlete, a better father, a better mother, a better businessman or woman, just all of those things. And it's so simple on one level, but it's so powerful. And I guess that was often my mantra when I was training was, what's the simplest thing that can give me the most benefit in my training work? My training is not complicated, but over time it's very powerful, and it gave me incredible results. And it's the same with the retreats that Brant and I teach together, Fit Soul, Fit Body, and also the ones that he teaches individually. His website is danceofthedeer.com, or no, shamanism.com. He has a foundation, Dance of the Deer Foundation. But anyway, shamanism.com. And in those workshops, he helps you to explore that environment, to strengthen it, to feel more peace, to feel happier and healthier. And so it's just I wouldn't have won those Ironmans without him. And in 1997, I was inducted into the Ironman Hall of Fame in Hawaii, and I brought him and his family over so that they could be there, so that I could honor him for the work that he did. That was really the backbone of what enabled me to take all those numbers and just catapult it into the stratosphere. And it's so much easier to look at numbers, because if you improve by a second, it's like, oh yeah, that's great. Right on. I'm getting there. I'm on the way, It's much harder if you have a go-to place inside of you that's fearful or has doubt, to do the work to change that. But it's so powerful when you can, because when you do, suddenly there's these windows that just open up of opportunity and possibility that never would have if all you did is work with the numbers. And so that's, again, that's what Fit Soul, Fit Body is about. Our website, fitsoulfitbody.com, describes a lot of that. We have a book out, Fit Soul, Fit Body, 9 Keys to a Healthier, Happier You. Our next retreat is coming up in mid-February here in Santa Cruz. It's a weekend workshop, and it's a great way for people to kind of get a real grasp of what it is that those concepts are, what it is that I did when I was racing that separated me from the pack.
That's awesome. I know you did one, I believe, in the last year at Crypt. Are you guys going to be back?
Yeah, we'll be there in June. No, actually, this year we're going to be there in April. You can look on their website. You going to be there?
I'm going to go, man. That was one of my questions for you. That's it's like 2.5, 3 hours. I get to meet the man in the flesh right here. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, that's a great retreat. We love going to Kripalu. It's a beautiful center and beautiful place to hold the workshop.
Awesome. Very cool. So could you give maybe like one example, or not an example, but like maybe an exercise or something that somebody could try to implement to quiet their mind, that they could integrate into their training or their practice?
Yeah, it's something that actually you can do in every single training session you have out there. If you're swimming, biking, and running, you start to feel your mind just getting all chattery. Keep in mind that there's a difference between like daydreaming and chatter. Daydreaming is just kind of where your mind is just sort of going through stuff, but you're not really directing it, or you're not, and daydreaming is actually, they're finding, is just as important for replenishing your being as sleep at night. And so if we're busy all day and we don't have time to just kind of stop and daydream a little bit, then even the sleep at night doesn't fully replenish us. But anyway, anytime you're in a training session and it starts to get tough and you start to get a little cynical or whiny, or, just take that breath, and let yourself be quiet. And you can just practice that over and over and over in every single session you do. If it's hard in training initially, then just go outside, watch a sunrise, watch a sunset, sit and just feel the wind, feel the season change from spring to summer, summer to fall, fall to winter. Go for a walk for 5 minutes. And just walk for 5 minutes or 10 minutes when something's bothering you, until all of a sudden you realize you're not really thinking about that thing that was bothering you anymore. And as you do that, you realize that you do have a choice. You can either be really negative or you can be quiet. And often if I have a hard time getting quiet, I'll just really reflect for a second. I'll say, okay, everything seems like it's just going down the drain right here, but what's one thing that I can be grateful for? What's one thing that I can be grateful for? And if you can find that one thing in that difficult moment, then it will significantly reduce the negative impact that negative situation is having on you. It will give you more clarity with which to re-engage in it and be more just steady, in that middle point of, okay, let me just manage this, as opposed to freaking out about it or thinking that it has to be solved in this instant. Right. And it's real powerful. It's powerful stuff.
No, I love it. I think that's awesome. Thank you. Friend of mine, fellow triathlete, wanted me to ask you this question. So he said, how does an athlete deal with the hangover after racing? So whether it's a good performance or a bad performance, but like, so for example, you kind of, he said this to me a lot, like you get done that race and you finish and you're like, you cross the line, it's like 10 seconds and then you start to catch your breath and you're like, okay, what's next? Like, what am I going to do next? Like, what's the next thing I'm going to do? Like, because you want more, that's the competitor, the athlete in all of us. Or on the, the negative side, how, like rebounding from a poor performance. There are two different experiences. So what would be some approaches, on the mental side that you would say?
Well, first thing, ultimately, there is no difference between a good race and a bad race if you don't learn something from it. So whether you finish first or last, if you don't learn something from it, you've wasted a significant part of the gold of what that day could have been for you. It's easy when you have a great race to just sort of be enveloped in that warm, fuzzy feeling of, wow, that was so great, But if you don't learn something from it about yourself, about your capacity, about how you managed to get through the points where you didn't think you could and come out with that top performance anyway, then part of you has wasted your time. And the only thing that you're going to be able to carry forward from it is the need to have another great performance. However, if you learn a lesson about your life, about yourself, an insight that you didn't have, that you gained through that great performance, then you can use that to carry you through a lot of different parts of your life. So let's say, for example, somebody wins their age group at some big race and they're so psyched about it, but they're really going into it, they were kind of intimidated by the performance, by the other competitors, and they didn't know how they'd stack up against them. Well, if they don't reflect and understand what it was that they did in that race to overcome that fear, then the next time they're in their normal daily life and they come across a situation where they feel inferior to a group of people, they're still going to feel inferior. They're not going to be able to work through it easier. However, if they learned from that race how they managed that fear and overcame it, then they'll be able to rise above it in that day-to-day life situation where maybe they're intimidated by a group of people that they have to talk in front of or engage with or communicate with. And the same with a bad performance. A bad performance is just an opportunity for feedback. First of all, okay, on maybe a physical level, why was it bad? And then on an internal level, what did I learn from that? I had a lot of bad races in Hawaii at the Ironman. The first 6 years that I went there, I didn't win it. I could be in the lead at the end of the bike. I could be in the lead halfway through the marathon. I could be in the lead with 3 or 4 miles to go in the marathon, but I couldn't hold it all the way to the finish. And I thought that I was cursed. Like, this island doesn't like me. There's something about it. And now that I look back at it, though, I realized that I had to have those bad races to learn the lessons that would then enable me to actually go forward and become the champion. And without those bad races, I wouldn't have learned the critical things that I needed. Like, how do I keep going when my vision or dream looks impossible? How do I give everything I have, even if on this day it's maybe not as much as I could have gotten out of myself on another day? How do I manage all of those difficult moments? Those were lessons that I was learning in those first 6 races, so that when they came up in the years that I won, they still came up, but I managed them better. And that enabled me to become a champion 6 times of that race. So if somebody has a bad race, for sure, grump about it, grind about it, process about it, get it out. And then about 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, when you've get a little distance from it, then go back and reflect and say, okay, what did I learn from this? Where's the gold in this for me that I can mine so that in the future I'm richer and better, and that it will help me? And the same with the good races. You're so high from those great events, those great wins, that for sure can be addictive. But again, if that's all you got out of it, then the only way to carry it forward is to have another one. And eventually you may not have another good one like that. Or maybe the only time in your life you're going to have one like that. So 2 or 3 weeks after your good races, do the same thing. Reflect and ask yourself, okay, what did I learn out of this? What did I gain? What insight do I have now that I didn't have before that event?
That's awesome. Is that like the lessons you learned from those years where you were unable to win before your first victory? Is that what allowed you to keep coming back because you learned something new and you felt like you had more to give?
Yeah, each of those victories taught me something also. But
right.
I also felt like up until each one of those years, I felt like this was great. I had great races, but I did feel like there was a little more I could bring to it. And for me, racing was more, it was almost like part of my spiritual practice to develop myself and through that experience. And up until the last Ironman that I did, I felt like there was more of me that I could bring into it. And then finally in 95, when I hit that start line, I knew that was it. I knew that no matter what happened on the day, that this was going to be the best possible race I could put together. And the ironic thing about it is when I came off the bike, I thought, I'm having the worst Ironman of my life. 13 and a half minutes down, this guy's ahead of me. I didn't feel so great coming off the bike, all that stuff. So in the race, in that moment, I thought I was having a crappy race. However, when I look back and see what I had to overcome to pull off that victory, I realized that indeed it was my greatest Ironman performance ever. It took more physically, emotionally, spiritually than any of the other ones by far, by magnitudes. And through that, I knew that that was my moment of transcending competition and truly turning it into something that was like art.
That's awesome. That's incredible. So you were definitely drawing on all 15 years of experience in that race for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so you have another book called The Art of Competition, which is fantastic. Highly recommend it. And this book also ties into a lot of what we've talked about. So there's quotes, and with each quote is a beautiful, rich photo of nature. And so I picked out a couple that kind of resonated with me, but I also think are very important to, well, they're all important, but really I think can help athletes on the physical and mental side of training. So one is over prepare and under train. So one, what does that mean, and why is that important?
That's a great one. This one probably takes some of the most time for people to really contemplate it, because over prepare but under train, it sounds like completely opposite things.
Right.
And it kind of is. So the over prepare part means to bring in a broader base of preparedness than you will ever need in the race. So even on a physical level, you can think of it, okay, you're doing these linear motions, but if you, through your strength training, you've done exercises that strengthen the cross fibers, then you've over prepared because you won't fall apart. Your biomechanics won't break down. Over prepare means go beyond anything that you'll need at any given instant in a race. So if it's a hilly course, do training that is on hills that are at least as steep, if not steeper, or as long or not longer than what you'll encounter in the race. Do work that is faster than race pace. Of course, you're not going to sustain that for the whole race, but that's the over prepare part. If you just train up to what you're going to need on race day, then if something goes wrong, then you don't have a broader base to pull from to keep you going, to prop you up. So that's the over prepare part. Build a broader base of strength, endurance, speed, mental preparation than you will need in that race. You know, everybody goes in there with their mental tool chest of whatever it is. Well, have 100 things in your mental tool chest in case you only need 5 of them. But if you didn't have that mental tool chest with 100 things, you may have missed one of those 5. Or something might come up that you didn't expect, but you're more prepared so you can deal with it. And then the undertrained part means make sure that you are just slightly undertrained, meaning getting better doesn't mean just loading on more volume, more speed. It means being fresh enough on race day that you actually have the energy in your internal batteries to really pull something amazing out of your hat. And, you know, this was probably the hardest part for me to get right, actually, because I would do like a 3-week taper going into Kona. And every year in the first 5 that I won, I felt like a week later, I was actually a little more rested than I was on race day. And so in 1995, I actually started my taper 4 weeks out. And that was the first year that I got on the start line and realized now I'm really rested. So I was always 1 week away from where I really needed to be in those first 5 victories, but it worked out for me, obviously. And interestingly, right about that time, a study came out from Europe saying that about 90% of all endurance athletes go into their big race at the end of the season overtrained, meaning they've trained, they're fit, but they haven't rested enough to be fully charged up for the race. And so that's really struck home with me that year, and that's why I added another week of taper into my final drop down. And so over prepare, build a base that's greater than anything you're ever going to need. Undertrained, meaning show up fresh and ready to go.
Love it. That's awesome. Okay, this is another favorite of mine. So a champion exploits every detail without ever forgetting the basics. Right? So why are the basics so important? Because like when I get really good and I'm at a high level, like I just want to be able to do like all the cool, fancy stuff, the hard, work, right? Why are the basics? That's just the boring stuff. That's the fundamentals, right?
Yeah, there's like in triathlon, there's more things out there for you to try to become better than you could possibly incorporate into your training, your preparation, your building your strategy. And so never forget those basics. You have to be able to swim, bike, and run. Swim, bike, run, swim, bike, run, swim, bike, run, swim, bike, run, swim, bike, run. And then once you really develop that base of the basics, then you can start to work on incorporating some of the little more extravagant stuff. So maybe it is a device that measures your sleep, or, something that fine tunes your nutrition, or, whatever it is. But if you become reliant on those extras and forget about the basics, it won't matter. Like, for me, without the work with Brant, studying with Brant, I wouldn't have won those Ironmans. So it's not that it wasn't a necessary part, but the other side of it is, like I said, I could have gone to 1,000 retreats a year, but if I didn't swim, bike, and run, I wouldn't have had the base to be able to exploit it. And so that's really keep one eye on the basics, make sure you're always doing those, always refining those, always improving those. If you approach sport as a practice for developing and perfecting yourself, then every time you do those basics, it's going to be a different experience. Every time you go for a run, your stride is going to be slightly different because you're moving toward more perfection, higher efficiency, more ease and grace, more flow. And as you do that, your body continues to change. Your experience of it continues to change. And that makes the basics very, very powerful. If you just go out and you just do it rote every day, you're not going to get any better. You get a little better, but not anywhere near your potential. And so utilizing those basics as a practice for perfecting yourself makes it an experience that's not something separate, like I'm doing sports and then I'm doing my work at work. If sports is a practice to perfect yourself, then you'll learn things there that are going to help you at work, and vice versa. And that's really what triathlon was for me. It was a way of one avenue of perfecting myself and learning about my life and learning about life.
That's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Next quote. And this one I'm interested to hear because I didn't quite grasp it. So discipline is flexible. Right?
Right.
So what does that mean? Because like when I think of discipline, I'm like discipline, like mental imagery that pops up, like visualization. You're thinking like military, like strict, like by the book, But discipline, why does it need to be flexible?
It's sort of like bamboo, bend but don't break. And it's the same with your training. You can set out the ideal training plan for the next 6 months, but in no way would you be able to anticipate all of the other things that will come in that are influencing your training and the amount that you can do and the amount that you can do and absorb and get better from. And so part of being disciplined means that you have to be flexible and that you have to factor in a lot of other areas of life as they are affecting your athletic discipline. And so some days it's like, no, that is not going to serve me and get me more fit to go out and do that 3-hour ride. I need to take a break and deal with this other thing, or I'm tired and I need to take the day off, or I'm feeling like I'm right on the edge and getting sick. I need to back it down. And so that's the flexibility part. And I've seen it with the athletes that I coach, the ones who do every single workout on the program. They usually don't do as well as people who miss a few of the workouts. So wow. Discipline is actually flexible, and it without that flexibility, we're not computers. You can't program your body to say, okay, for these next 12 weeks, I'm going to do all of these workouts, because ideally, yeah, that would be great. But, the other pressures in life, the other stresses in life aren't factored into that ideal workout plan. And so that's where the flexibility has to come in if you're going to optimize the discipline within which you are doing these things.
I love that. That makes me feel a little better, because that's actually something I've gotten better at as I've gotten older. I used to be that, I'm going to check every box. I'm going to do every workout. It's got to be at this intensity for this amount of time. And then, as I've gotten older, I listen to my body a lot more. Mm-hmm. Like, how do I feel when I wake up? Am I, stiff? Do I need to do a little bit more movement in the morning? If I have a session that's planned for that day, it's something that's hard. Like, I'm not afraid to pull an audible, so to speak, and completely mm-hmm. change it, or do less sets, less reps, or less volume, less intensity. Because in the long run, it's consistency and quality, right? And I look at it now, like, if I push myself and I go over the edge and I get sick, then I'm going to be out a lot longer. So why not take a day off and rest?
Mm-hmm. Most triathletes don't need motivation. They need to be able to pull in the reins a little bit. So it's easy for me to use that quote a lot of times for people who are doing triathlon or endurance events, marathons, because they're usually very got to get out there, But yeah, I think you said something that's really key in there, and that's is this going to serve me in the long haul? And that's how I look at every single workout that I do now. I might be psyched to do more than would be good for me in the long haul. So I'll cut it shorter so that in the long haul, I am consistent. I am able to get out there also tomorrow, and I'm able to recover from what I'm doing today, as opposed to just blasting through this, whatever it is today, and then be wasted tomorrow.
Awesome. That's right. You got to think of it long term, because it's definitely a journey for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Last quote. And I think this ties right back around to what we were discussing at the very beginning when you were talking about quieting your mind. So, inner peace, then outer results, not the other way around.
Yeah, this one came kind of out of my first Ironman win in 1989. Prior to 1989, I'd done Ironman 6 times. I hadn't won it, and each one of those years I was trying to win it. Going into 89, I realized, the real goal isn't necessarily to win, it's to have a great race. And so in 89, I designed everything around trying to figure out how to actually have my best race. Forget about what I thought I needed to do to beat Dave Scott and all the other guys. How can I have my best race? Meaning, how can I put together a race where I go fast on the swim and the bike and I don't fall apart on the run? How can I do this? And so going into the race that year, the real quest was to have a great race. It wasn't to win. And with that shift, it's subtle, but it was a significant real shift. All of a sudden, I just had this inner peace. Like, I was on the start line and I was just like, wow, and before all the other years, I was wound as tight as you possibly could be before that gun went off. And this year I was just like, wow, and it was such a different feel. And it was like I had that inner peace before the gun went off. I didn't have to try to get to the finish line at a certain time in front of everybody else before I had that feeling of inner peace. And through that, I think that's one of the reasons that I was able to then start to evolve what happened in the race, and eventually went on and won my first time that year. So inner peace, then outer results, not the other way around.
Awesome. That's great. Great advice. Now we just need to all put it into practice. That's the tough part.
It is, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So we have covered all the topics. Ready to move into the rapid fire?
I am.
Awesome. Okay. So first question. So given all of your life experience and all the knowledge that you've accumulated, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself 25 years ago?
Inner peace, then outer results.
Nice. Okay. What's your favorite strength training exercise?
I have this one where I hang from a pull-up bar, mm-hmm. where my grips are like this, they're not like this, they're like this. And I just do all these ab things with it, where I'm moving around in all these different positions. And then I do some plank stuff where I'm on one leg and one arm and the other side, and different things, moving everything around. So it's not really one, it's just like all these different things where everything's getting engaged at the same time. I love that.
Nice. I can tell you like the neurological component to it very much, of the strength training, of that aspect.
Yeah, that's where a lot of your efficiency comes from, is that neurological patterning that happens. And I think the more you develop that, the broader your base. So the over prepared part, like we were talking about, my main go-to sport now is surfing.
Nice.
I live 2 blocks from the main break here, one of the main breaks in Santa Cruz, and I can walk down. And that sport requires every part of your body to be utilized at the same time. And it's balance, it's cardio, it's being in nature, it's stress relief, it's quieting my mind. And so there's just so many aspects that are involved when you're out there in the water and it's moving, and the surface that you're performing your sport on is not stable. It's moving also. And so everything is dynamic and nothing is scripted. Like you can't just say, okay, this is what I'm going to do on this wave. The wave dictates everything. So it's just really cool.
That's why I like rowing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's right. That's a good, you know what? I've never surfed. All my friends growing up did, but I've never had it described exactly as you just put it together there. That's a great way of looking at all the different sort of variables that you have to account for as you're practicing surfing.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. So how has your training changed in present day compared to when you were competing?
When I was competing, I had one goal in mind, to have a peak performance. Now my goal is to have lifelong health and longevity. Peak performance and life health are 2 different universes for sure. Peak performance, the closer you are to your genetic capability, the closer you are to an edge that's overtrained, burned out, injured, getting sick. And so even though it's incredible to be at that level where you are just in this ultimate flow of what you're capable of, it can come at a price if you go one step beyond that. And so, I back it way down now. I don't do anything that pushes my body. I do everything to stimulate my body to be healthier, as opposed to pushing it to find a peak performance. And it's also, like I said earlier, it's more a practice for me to continually evolve myself, because a lot of what I learned when I move. I've done that my whole life. And so when I'm out there surfing, it's all an evolution of me as a person. And, ironically, the weird thing is, here I am, I'm 58, and I surf better now than I ever have my whole life, which, I wasn't a hot shot when I was a kid by any stretch of the imagination, but, my reasons for surfing and the way that I surf are very different, I think, than a lot of other guys. And, this one guy said, you're like friggin' Benjamin Button, you're just getting younger.
That's awesome. That's a great, that's an awesome compliment to have, you know what I mean? Because that ties right back into what you said about health and longevity.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Have you ever had an injury? And if so, how did that injury affect your training in your life?
I never had any significant injuries when I was racing. I was very preventative oriented. I got a lot of massage. I got a lot of body work to keep everything tuned and dialed in. Every now and then something would happen that, even the doctors couldn't figure out, and Brant would work on me then. He's an amazing healer. And so he would fix me up when, I'd have one year I had a hamstring that was completely it was locked up. It wouldn't unlock. And the doctor's like, well, you got to take 6 weeks off. I'm like, no, I have to go win Ironman in 6 weeks. That's not an answer, And, Brant worked on me in the way that, in his traditional healing methodology, and got me going again. But basically, I was very injury free. But again, I didn't do as much speed work as most guys, so I didn't push my body that way. I had a much longer off season than most guys, twice as long, 3 times as long. And so I recovered thoroughly year to year. And then I also raced about half as many races a year as most of the guys. So I was really focused on early in my career, I said, when I'm done with this, I want to leave uninjured and not burned out. And so that was an underlying guiding point throughout everything I did throughout my career, because I had seen cyclists, runners, triathletes over the years. I trained in Boulder a lot. And so, I saw world-class folks, almost all of them leave because they went over the edge and they couldn't come back. And it wasn't, they were not leaving their sport because by choice, but by being forced out. And I said, that's not how I want to leave. I want to, when I'm done, it'll be an athletic death, but it won't be the big death of my life. And I want to hopefully live another 40, 50, 60 years and be able to keep moving and be healthy. And so I didn't overtrain. And so injuries, I didn't really have many, if any. I didn't have anything serious. Let me put it that way.
No, I think that's such an important point. I mean, you mentioned that you took sometimes 2 to 3 times the amount of length for your off season. So you gave the mind and the body the rest it needed after such an intense, competitive season, and the training season, of course, too. But also, I think that's a really key point because, especially now as we learn more about some of the effects of, like professional football players and the concussions and stuff, they're not the same after they're done their sport. Or even if they don't have concussions, the amount of trauma they've placed their body through for, a decade or less, it's like they basically got in a car crash every Sunday,
I gave a keynote talk to the staff of the New York Knicks a couple of years ago. And so there was about, 50 or 60 folks there, all the back end, and a lot of the guys were ex-players, and poor guys, every single one of them, you could tell their knees were shot the way they walked. And it's like they had just ruined their knees through their sport, something they had love and passion for. But at the same time, they really paid a price. Is there a way that you can do these other sports without paying a price? I don't know. I don't play football. I don't play basketball, but I was one of the few who exited triathlon and haven't had to have overuse, injury surgeries and things like that since I retired.
Wow. That's incredible. So on that note, what is one thing that junior athletes should be doing more of to complement their training and their health?
Taking a little easier. Everybody's in this military combat fitness mode right now with all the different modalities that are out there, and a human being is not designed to push their body every day. That anaerobic, high stress, fight or flight thing that you get into when you go really hard, yeah, you'll get some immediate results. It will give you bigger muscles right away. You'll get fitter and faster very quickly, but it's not sustainable. And it's very easy to push too hard when you're young because your body hasn't been under stress for that long. If you're 20 or 25, so you can withstand a huge volume of this before you start to see the negative effects. But ultimately, be patient. Do a lot more stuff at moderate levels. Build your fitness over time. Don't over race. But mostly really enjoy it.
Awesome. What is your best tip to improve recovery after a training session?
The biggest tool for recovery for me was sleep. Without enough sleep, forget it. Diet obviously is important. You got to eat good food. You got to hydrate after workouts. You got to replenish with enough protein and fats and carbohydrate and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, sleep is the number one tool for recovery. If you don't get enough sleep, you're not recovering enough. And that can be hard. Most people are not professional athletes, so they have jobs, they have families, jobs and families. And then they're trying to do an Ironman or whatever it is. What do? They get up at 4 a.m. to get in a swim and, that kind of thing. Sleep is essential. Without it, it's very hard for your body to recover. If you drink a ton of coffee, especially later in the day, caffeine, you don't sleep as soundly. If you drink a bunch of alcohol at night, that alcohol is competing in a lot of the organs in your body for the same mechanisms that repair your muscles, so you don't lay down the same lean muscle that you would without that. So a lot of our sort of acceptable lifestyle things inhibit recovery, but also just lifestyle itself, life itself can inhibit recovery. So sleep, my friend.
Awesome.
Sleep.
Awesome. Okay, the last couple here, these are all fun ones. What's your favorite meal?
Tortilla, hummus, and avocado.
Oh man, that sounds good.
Yeah, corn tortilla, hummus, slathered on avocado. Sometimes I'll put some walnuts on it, put a bunch of salt on it. It's really good, delicious. Maybe a little salsa.
Nice.
Go to.
Very cool. I'm going to try that. What is one book everyone should read?
Oh, Fit Soul, Fit Body, for sure.
Nice. Nice. And I'll be sure, I'll put that in the link in the show notes to it.
Fitsoulfitbody.com.
Okay. Who have you studied, or do you continue to study in your life and your career to get better, to learn?
Well, I study with Brant. I've studied with him now for 26 years, I guess. I go to retreats that he teaches all over the world, probably 7 or 8 retreats a year, and it's a way to recharge and refuel the batteries, to disconnect from all of the I've got one of those too.
Yeah, we have a cat jumping across the screen here.
Disconnect from the reality is, or I should say my reality is now that I have a lot of time where I'm doing social media stuff, and social media is so fast paced, and there's so much information that is being transferred between my computer screen and my brain. And when I go away on those retreats and I don't have that, I realize how depleting that is on my brain physiology, and this is another thing that research is showing, is that, your brain needs as much time to regenerate and repair itself as your muscle. So at night, all those neurotransmitters, they get replenished and stocked back up. And if we're using our brains at this super high capacity, like most of us do these days, I just don't know if we're giving ourselves enough downtime to let things sort of refile themselves and regenerate. And the retreats that I go on, if for nothing else, it helps my brain to recover, really charge up. But anyway, so back to your answer, studying with Brant, because it's, he's mentioned a number of times that in shamanism, you don't ever graduate. It's a way of life that will help you to continually evolve who you are throughout your entire life. And in the Huichol village, the elders are very respected because maybe they're not as physically strong as the young folks, but their spirit is so strong and they have so much knowledge. And, they don't have Alzheimer's. They don't have dementia. But even the old people, they walk up and down these hillsides that, probably half the people in the U.S. couldn't even walk because, their heart rate would be through the roof. It's not a nice little paved trail. There's rocks and stuff all over the place. And so, here's these people that are 90, 100 years old, just like floating up and down these hills to get to their village. It's just amazing how a human being can grow older and be so vital and vibrant and fluid. And, if I look at some of the old folks in the Huichol village, I've been down there with Brant, they have this young spirit about them. They hang out, they still laugh, they still joke. It's like they don't become hard and rigid like I see a lot of people in our culture as they get older. It's like they get stuck in a certain mold of themselves, and then they can't ever go beyond that. But in the Huichol world, they say that you continue to learn your whole life, and when you stop learning, that's when you die. And you can kind of see that, like in our world, when people don't wake up with purpose anymore, that's when they start to die because they stop learning.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Totally agree with that. Absolutely. Well, this has been an absolute honor. We covered some tremendous ground here. I'm really glad that we got to go into an area that I don't I don't think a lot of people kind of spend enough time talking about. So it was really cool to have one of the best athletes of all time on the podcast, providing his insight and experiences. So thank you so much, Mark.
Hey, my honor. Pleasure to be with you. Enjoyed the questions.
Yeah, thank you. Just hang on the line. Let me give you a proper goodbye offline. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this brand new episode on the Leo Training Podcast. If you enjoyed this content, I would greatly appreciate it if you would take a moment of your time and drop in a 5-star review on iTunes, or please take a moment and share it on your favorite social media networks such as Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. It really helps the show to grow and reach new audiences. And be sure to tune in next week with a brand new episode where I sit down and interview senior SFG Cole Summers.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.